She didn't scream when he left. She didn't chase him down the hallway or beg him to stay. She simply stood there, one hand on the fridge door, the other trembling over an empty jar of peanut butter as her world quietly collapsed. Alina Reyes had no food, no money, and a sick child wrapped in a thrift store blanket. Her husband had vanished without a word, drained their bank account, and left her with bills, fear, and silence. But what no one, not her sister, not her neighbors, not even the man who walked out, could have predicted, was what she'd become. Because Alina wasn't just going to survive. She was going to rise, and when she did, she wouldn't just build a new life. She'd change thousands of others, not with vengeance, with vision. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about power, about a woman the world tried to erase, who turned every broken piece into the blueprint for something unstoppable. Some betrayals don't come with shouting or slammed doors. Some come with silence, the kind that arrives quietly after the fridge is empty. The rent is past due, and the person you trusted most has vanished without explanation. For Alina Reyes, that silence wasn't just painful, it was deadly. It echoed through her bare kitchen, bounced off her son's hollow stomach, and curled into the corners of her heart like mold. Her husband, Marcus, didn't scream. He didn't fight. He simply walked out the front door one morning with a duffel bag and didn't come back. No note, no goodbye. Just a vacuum where partnership should have been. But this isn't just a story about abandonment. It's about how Alina took that silence, that betrayal, that near starvation, and built something stronger than rage. Because while Marcus vanished into the fog of his own cowardice, Alina stayed and suffered and clawed her way out of a pit so deep even her reflection forgot what dignity looked like. But she never gave up. And what shocked everyone, even him, wasn't just that she survived. It's what she became. But before we get there, we have to go back to the moment she realized the cupboards were empty. And so was the man who once promised her forever. Alina had been a stay-at-home mother for nearly 4 years, raising their son Oliver while Marcus worked as a mid-level IT manager at a firm downtown. They weren't wealthy, but they had managed. A 2-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, yes, but it was stable. Or so she thought. She began to notice the lies long before she was willing to call them that. The missed calls, the unexplainable expenses, the increasing late nights. When she'd ask about it, Marcus always had an excuse: stress, traffic, deadlines. But nothing explained the growing coldness in his eyes, the withdrawal, and most of all, the way he looked at Oliver with a flicker of resentment he tried to hide. She chalked it up to pressure, burnout, fatigue. But she was wrong. He wasn't burning out, he was burning bridges. The day he left, it was raining. Alina remembers that not because of the weather, but because of how the leak in their ceiling splashed into a metal bowl all morning, creating a rhythm that filled the silence he left behind. She didn't even realize he was gone until noon. His closet was nearly empty, his shaving kit missing. The joint bank account drained, not overdrawn. Emptied with surgical precision. No call, no message. Just a woman and her child left behind with $26 in her purse and 3 slices of stale bread on the counter. And here's the thing nobody tells you about survival: it's not always loud. Sometimes it's doing math in your head while pretending everything's fine. It's rationing your child's meals while saying you're just not hungry. It's crying in the shower so they don't hear you. Alina did all of it for weeks. She reached out to friends, but most had disappeared along with Marcus. Her family? Estranged. Her sister, Lexi, who hadn't spoken to her in over a year, responded with a single text, "You made your bed." And so she laid in it, cold, alone, desperate, but not defeated. Never that dot. As Oliver grew weaker, Alina's panic deepened. He had developed a persistent cough, and the dollar store cough syrup she could barely afford wasn't helping. One night, with the fridge echoing and her child's skin clammy with fever, she did something she never thought she'd do. She begged. She walked into a pharmacy, asked the clerk for samples, tried to smile through shame. The clerk shook their head. "Policy." She walked out, but not before a man in a dark coat noticed her trembling hands and red eyes. He followed her silently, then called out, "Hey, miss." She turned, startled, bracing for judgment. Instead, he handed her a bag of groceries and a bottle of children's ibuprofen. "No strings," he said. "I've seen worse. I was worse." And then he walked away before she could thank him. That moment, that single flicker of grace, was the crack in the dam. Not because it solved everything, but because it reminded her that kindness still existed, but the world wasn't finished testing her. That act of kindness led to an even stranger encounter. The next day, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a simple note. "There's more help, if you're willing to do something different." Along with it, an address and a time. Alina stood at her kitchen table, holding that letter like it was a ticking bomb. But what choice did she have? There's a peculiar kind of courage that shows up when you've got nothing left to protect. Not pride, not comfort, not even fear. That's where Alina Reyes stood that morning as she dressed Oliver in too thin clothes and tucked the mysterious letter into her coat pocket. The address scrawled inside led to the edge of downtown, a part of the city where hope went to hide. Alina didn't know what she was walking into, only that whatever it was couldn't feel worse than sitting in her apartment watching her son waste away while the world passed her by. She arrived at a modest brick building sandwiched between a payday loan office and a shuttered dry cleaner. At exactly 10 a.m., she stepped through the door. The hallway smelled like old carpet and cheap cologne. A single sign pointed up, "Second floor, conference 3B." The elevator groaned as it rose, and with every second, Alina imagined everything. From a secret charity to a black market scheme. She was prepared for judgment. What she didn't expect was opportunity. Waiting inside conference room 3B was a man in his late 40s. Tidy, calm, the kind of face you'd see in a financial planning brochure, but with eyes that hinted at something heavier. "Ms. Reyes," he said, "I'm Daniel Keene. You came. That matters." He offered her tea. She declined. "You said there was help," she replied, her voice cautious. He nodded. "There is. But I have to be honest, it's not what you're expecting. Let's pause here. Because this is the fork in the road for so many people, the moment someone dangles a rope when you're in a pit. But it's frayed, unclear, and maybe tied to something you wouldn't normally reach for. Desperation tests your boundaries." But Alina hadn't lost her compass. She still had rules, and Daniel was about to test every one of them. He slid a folder across the table. "This is a short-term job," he explained. No paperwork. Cash compensation. It requires discretion. Alina opened the folder. Inside, a delivery address, a locked briefcase, and instructions not to open it. She stared at it, then back at him. "What's in the case?" she asked. "You don't want to know," he replied softly. That was enough. She stood up. Then, "I don't want to carry it." This is the moment many would walk away from the story, but not Alina, because Daniel didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He smiled. "Good," he said. That was the test. Turns out there was no shady delivery, no briefcase, no risk. It was all bait to see if she'd take the easy money or stand firm. People break under pressure, Daniel said. But people who hold the line, that's rare. I work with someone who values rare. He handed her a second folder. Inside was a legitimate offer, a support role at a private community foundation, full childcare stipend, and enrollment in a part-time accounting course. You've got a mind for logistics, he said, and grit. We can use both. Alina sat back down slowly. Why me? She asked. Because you said no, he answered. Now, here's what matters most about this moment. It wasn't just a reward. It was recognition. Someone saw past her circumstance and into her character. That's something no government assistance or charity drive ever gave her. This was dignity, restored not by pity but by partnership. And she accepted. Over the next few weeks, Alina began rebuilding not just her life, but her identity. She dropped Oliver off at the foundation's childcare wing each morning and sat behind a real desk, sorting grant applications and scheduling events. For the first time in years, someone depended on her for something other than survival. She bought groceries without shame, paid a utility bill before the due date. She even got Oliver a warm coat and watched him twirl in it like a superhero. But the world doesn't like clean turnarounds. It always sends shadows just when the light starts to return. And Alina's shadow had a name, Marcus. It started with V. A text, then a voicemail, then a knock at her door. He stood there, thin, pale, shaking slightly. "I need help," he said. Alina didn't speak, not at first. Not until Oliver peeked around the corner and said, "Mom, who's that?" She turned back to Marcus and replied, "Someone who left." Some ghosts don't rattle chains. They wear old sneakers and offer half-baked apologies. Marcus didn't return with flames or fury. He came back with empty eyes and hollow words. And while part of Alina wanted to slam the door in his face, another part, the part that still remembered what it felt like to love him, hesitated. But hesitation isn't weakness. It's evidence of healing. Because when you've been broken, your empathy doesn't vanish. It just learns to hold a mirror up first. She let him sit on the bottom stair outside her apartment, not inside. She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Marcus?" His response? Not tears, not accountability, just deflection. "I've hit a rough patch. Things got messy. I didn't know where else to go." That's what abusers do. They edit the past until their absence sounds like a logistical error instead of abandonment. But Alina wasn't that woman anymore. Still, he talked. About being scammed in a crypto scheme. About couch surfing. About being fired after his employer audited him for behavioral red flags. And then, of course, came the real reason he showed up. I want to see my son. Let's be honest here. There's a part of every parent, no matter how wronged, that aches to give their child a complete story. Alina wasn't spiteful, but she was protective. And she remembered every night Oliver asked why Daddy didn't come home. Every lie she had to soften. Every breakfast she made without eggs or electricity. So she said something that took all her strength. You can write him a letter, and I'll decide if he reads it. Marcus scoffed. You don't get to decide that. I do now, she said, and closed the door. Over the next few days, Marcus hovered at the school pickup line, outside the Foundation's building, always watching, never helping. Alina documented everything. And here's where her new life came through in a way her old one never did. The Foundation's legal counsel intervened, quietly, thoroughly. Within a week, Alina had full emergency custody protection filed. Not revenge, just boundaries. Because survival is more than food and shelter. It's knowing how to stop the cycle before it touches your child again. But the confrontation stirred something deeper. Alina found herself pacing at night, questions pressing at her like cold wind. Not about Marcus, but about herself. Could she have done something differently? Was she blind to the signs? Had she been complicit in her own unraveling? Here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Being victimized doesn't make you weak, but it does make you question your own judgment. And that's where many survivors get stuck. Not in the past, but in their own reflection. That's when something unexpected happened. Lexi called. Yes, the same Lexi who texted, "You made your bed," months ago. Her voice was brittle. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was angry. I thought you were being dramatic, but now..." She trailed off, then confessed she'd left her own partner, that she was living in her car, that everything she'd judged Alina for had finally landed on her doorstep. Alina didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't lash out. She just said, "Where are you parked?" That's the kind of woman she'd become. Not because she was saintly, but because she understood something most people don't. Hurt people, but healed people help them back. Lexi moved in temporarily. She and Oliver bonded immediately. Alina saw her sister's walls crumble day by day, not with lectures, but with consistency. A warm meal, a quiet place to sleep, a job referral. One morning over coffee, Lexi said, "I didn't think you'd still care." Alina smiled. "I didn't stop. I just couldn't carry both of us when I was drowning." Now she could. By this point, the Foundation's board had taken notice of Alina's ability to connect, to lead, to manage crisis with quiet strength. She was offered a promotion program director for their new national outreach initiative. It came with more money, more pressure, and more visibility, but also purpose. And that word meant everything. When Daniel handed her the official offer letter, he said, "You're the reason we've helped double the number of families this quarter." She looked at the document, then up at him. "You sure I'm not just a good story?" He shook his head. "You're a blueprint." And here's where we pause, because at this point, you might think the arc is complete. Woman abandoned, rebuilds life, achieves success. But the most powerful part of Alina's journey wasn't her comeback. It was her choice to stay grounded. She didn't change numbers and move to a condo uptown. She stayed in her neighborhood, took Oliver to the same park, donated groceries every Friday to a shelter she once stood outside of, begging. Her scars didn't fade, they became instructions, and she followed them forward. What does healing look like when you're not just surviving anymore, but standing tall, with the means to build something that didn't exist before? For Alina Reyes, it looked like walking into a boardroom not as a token of struggle, but as a force of vision. Her nameplate read Program Director, but what she carried into those rooms was more powerful than any title. It was lived experience. It was fluency in desperation and recovery. It was the kind of credibility you don't learn in seminars. It's carved from sleepless nights and quiet triumphs. Her new role at the foundation wasn't just operational, it was architectural. She was tasked with building the outreach framework for families falling through the cracks, families like hers had been. And rather than dust off old strategies, she did something radical. She listened. She visited local community centers, churches, school gyms, anywhere people gathered without filters. She asked what they needed, not what fit in a grant application. And what she heard echoed the truth she'd lived. Most people aren't asking for handouts. They're begging for stability, for someone to believe in them before the eviction notice hits the door. And that's exactly what she designed. The new outreach model offered food stipends, emergency childcare, financial literacy workshops, and mental health counseling, all without requiring a 5-page essay on why your suffering was valid. And it worked. Because dignity, when restored, doesn't need to beg. It rises, and it spreads. The more she traveled, the more people began to recognize her story, her name, her message. But Alina wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in forward. So when reporters asked for interviews, she only agreed if they included interviews with recipients too. "Don't tell my story," she said once to a producer. "Tell what came out of it." One such interview changed everything. It was a simple segment on a local station, Alina in a library meeting room talking to single parents about emergency budgeting. A viewer watched it from the comfort of a luxury office suite. His name? Jacob Winter, a tech entrepreneur turned quiet philanthropist. Jacob wasn't your typical executive. Known for disappearing from boardrooms to volunteer at shelters, he had built his wealth in cybersecurity and now focused on rebuilding broken systems. He reached out to the foundation with an offer to partner. But when he met Alina, something shifted. They spoke for 2 hours in the foundation's conference room about impact metrics, scalability, and public trust. But underneath the numbers was a current neither could ignore. Jacob wasn't interested in saviorism. He wanted to empower people who already knew how to survive. And Alina? She didn't want handouts. She wanted infrastructure. Still, something in their dynamic sparked curiosity. A quiet respect, a shared weariness for performative charity. After that meeting, Jacob invited her to tour one of his private initiatives, an incubator for social entrepreneurs. There, she met young people with records, addictions, and complex histories, yet building apps to track food insecurity, redesign prison reentry, and mentor teen parents. "They remind me of you," Jacob said. Alina looked around and whispered, "They remind me of who I could have been if someone hadn't helped." Their connection grew, slowly, carefully. They had coffee after events, long walks after board meetings. Still, Alina kept her guard up, because after Marcus, her trust didn't come in gallons, it trickled in drops. But Jacob never pushed. And maybe that's what won her over. He didn't try to fix her. He just stood beside her as she fixed everything herself. Then one evening, after a long day of donor briefings and outreach visits, Jacob offered her a ride home. In the car, under the dim glow of passing streetlights, he turned to her and said, "You've changed more lives in 2 years than I have in 20. Alina looked out the window, then back at him. "I didn't change lives," she said. "I just refused to let mine be wasted." There was no kiss, no dramatic score. Just a pause, and in that pause, the understanding that something was building. Not because of romance, but because of resonance. But life, as it always does, had one more test to deliver. Marcus again, this time with a lawyer. He had filed for partial custody of Oliver, claimed he was rehabilitated, that he had a stable income, and most absurd of all, that Alina's increased visibility meant she was too busy to parent. It was a low blow, a strategic move. But it didn't land, because Alina wasn't fighting alone anymore. The Foundation's legal team rallied. Lexi testified. Old eviction notices, text records, and eyewitness accounts surfaced. And in a moment of poetic closure, even one of the original grocers Marcus had stiffed years earlier submitted a notarized letter. The judge ruled decisively: full custody to Alina, supervised visitation optional at her discretion. And with that, the last thread of Marcus's influence was severed, not with fury, but with fact. And as Alina left the courthouse that day, she didn't cheer, she didn't gloat, she simply exhaled. A breath she'd been holding for 3 years. Some victories don't come with confetti, they come with clean sheets, warm meals, and your child sleeping safely down the hall. After the custody ruling, Alina Reyes didn't throw a party. She went home, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and watched Oliver draw a space station on a wrinkled piece of printer paper. The hum of the fridge, the soft scratch of pencil on paper, that was the soundtrack of her peace. Not loud, not public, but earned. The next chapter didn't begin with a headline. It began with agency. Alina no longer woke up in fear. She woke up in purpose. And while many would have used that courtroom victory to bury the past, Alina did something different. She turned it into blueprints. She proposed a new program through the Foundation, Recovery by Design, a transitional support initiative for parents escaping abandonment, financial abuse, or coercive relationships. It included legal aid, emergency shelter, and trauma-informed childcare. "We need to build bridges, not just ladders," she said in a proposal meeting. "Because people like me don't need a way up. We need a way through." The board approved the pilot immediately. But more than that, they offered her the role of executive director. At 33, Alina would now oversee not just one program, but the entire national framework of the Foundation. Her office moved to the top floor. The plaque on her door read, "Alina Reyes, Executive Director." But she still rode the elevator down each day to eat lunch with the interns. Still checked in on the child care wing. Still packed up leftover catered sandwiches to drop at the shelter on her way home, because some leaders wear power like armor. Alina wore it like a second skin light, honest and unafraid to admit she'd once bled too. Meanwhile, Jacob continued to be a presence in her life, never intrusive, always steady. They shared dinners after events, co-hosted retreats for young organizers, and every few weeks exchanged late-night texts about programs they wished existed. One night over takeout and spreadsheets, Jacob finally said, "Have you ever thought about what you want next? Not for the foundation, for you." Alina paused. It was a question she hadn't let herself ask in years. She'd built so much around responsibility, survival, and service that she'd nearly forgotten she was still allowed to want joy, softness, adventure, even love. "I don't know," she said. "I've always been chasing stability." He nodded. "What if it's chasing you now?" That winter, they took a trip, just a weekend, just the two of them. No suits, no schedules, just snow, a cabin, and quiet. They didn't talk about the past. They sat by the fire, read books, cooked badly, and laughed like people who'd learned the hard way that nothing good should be taken for granted. And somewhere between the stillness and the crackle of wood, Alina allowed herself to lean not out of dependence but trust. She took his hand not because she needed it, but because she chose to. Back home, life didn't become a fairy tale. Oliver still got sick. Lexi still forgot appointments. The boiler in Alina's building still groaned like a ghost every time. It kicked on. But through all of it, there was this new rhythm, one made not of panic, but of power. Then one spring morning, Alina stood before a graduating class of emergency caseworkers. She was the keynote speaker. She looked out at the room, some in heels, some in hoodies, all hungry to make change, and she told them a story about an apartment with no heat, about a letter with no sender, about saying no when it would have been easier to say yes, about the kind of love that doesn't save you, but believes in you long enough for you to save yourself. She ended her speech with the words Charles once said to her, and now she passed them on. "You didn't just survive. You gave others a reason to keep breathing." The crowd rose. But Alina didn't beam. She just bowed her head, closed her eyes, and remembered the girl she used to be, the one who cried in the dark beside an empty fridge. And then she walked off stage, because her work wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ones who are written off, abandoned, and underestimated are often the ones who return not for revenge, but for repair. When we invest in people's dignity, not just their needs, we build more than survivors. We build leaders. Alina Reyes was never rescued. She rose and then turned around and made sure others could do the same.